Hello, everyone. Welcome. Already starting to see some people come in, so I'm going to start to give a couple shout outs. Welcome, Kate Kilpatrick, David Rubin, uh, Maria Calea, Ali. Welcome. Getting a good amount of people coming in right now, which is great to see. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Pamela Howard Crisis Reporting Forum, the IGNet Pamela Howard Crisis Reporting Forum. We're really excited to have you. If this is your first forum, let me give the spiel about who we are and what we do. We are a project of IGNet, which is itself a project of the International Center for Journalists. Our job here at the forum is to do monthly webinars, twice monthly actually, on big topics surrounding journalism today. We're trying to help guide you through aspects like what we're doing today, media sustainability. We are trying to talk about how to cover global crises around the world, anything from conflict to climate change to press freedom. And we're helping you with tools and resources with your journalism career, whether you're a freelancer, all the way up to like a middle manager at a news outlet. So we're really excited to have you here. If everyone can do me a big help and send a quick thumbs up if you can hear me correctly. And if not, then I'll have to adjust my own volume. Perfect, that looks great. So everyone, while I see a couple people raising their hands, I won't be able to address that right now. But while we wait for just a few more people to come in, I just want to say that we have a really packed schedule on the forum this month. So today we're going to be talking about media sustainability and kind of tips and tools for journalists, newsroom managers, everything along those lines on how to kind of enter the new year with like a little bit of a better toolkit for the new year for 2025. Next week, we're going to actually be talking about media trust. We're going to be having a conversation with James Briner on media trust and how to rebuild media trust. And at the end of in the week after, we're going to have a session on media literacy. So a lot happening in this session. I know we didn't have a webinar last week because of the Thanksgiving holidays here in the States. So we only had one webinar in November, but we have 3 here in December for you to make up for that. So I'm going to get started. Everyone, welcome. I know we'll have a few more people start to trickle in over time, but we have a really good number right now to start with. So we're going to start with right now. I'm going to do my introduction and we'll get started. So let's begin. So from freelancers trying to maintain a steady flow of commissions to newsroom managers searching for ways to keep their outlets independently viable, media viability is a top of mind issue for many journalists in an increasingly challenging industry. As the news industry experiences layoffs, closures, and declining revenue, maintaining financial sustainability and psychosocial well-being is paramount for journalists, editors, and anyone working in media. So in this session, we're going to discuss useful tools for journalists to navigate a news industry just currently filled with uncertainty, how to manage their professional stressors, and more. So I want to introduce our 2 panelists today. Thank you for joining us. Andrew Mercier is the Senior Editorial Director at Muck, which is the software platform that fosters trust and relationships between PR professionals and journalists. He has been at Muck since 2015 and is responsible for the growth, maintenance, and engagement of Muck constantly growing journalism community. Over the course of his career, Andrew has developed a deep interest in the journalism industry and is striving to learn as much as he can in order to help foster the next generation of journalists. He's a graduate of NYU, New York University, and you can also follow him on X at Andrew_Muck. Our other panelist today is coming to us from Brazil, Samanta de Carmo. She's the executive manager of Azure, the Brazilian Journalism Association. So she started her career at Sao Paulo, the biggest city in Brazil, as a local reporter on the political desk and covered regional and national elections in Brazil for years. In 2014, she took over the position of a congressional reporter in the capital, Brasilia. And over her nearly 15 years working as a journalist, she has held positions as radio reporter, news editor, TV producer, newsroom coordinator, and much, much more. She was a fellow at the Women Leadership Accelerator from the Online News Association and Emerging Media Leaders from our parent company, ICFJ. Today, she's currently focusing on editorial, project management, and strategic planning for journalism organizations. So 2 really just credentialed guests today who are going to be able to give you a lot of information on their own experiences to help you. So we're going to just start by addressing the problem of sustainability firsthand. And I'm going to ask both of you, and Samantha or Andrew, you can take it as you wish. What major sustainability challenges have you seen that journalists face today? You know, either financially, regarding burnout, psychosocially. What are you seeing today?
I'd say it's a better question for Samantha, but I'm happy to start. I think, hi everyone, happy to be here. But many of you may know, but Muck we put out a yearly survey on the state of journalism and also recently launched, I think this year was the first one, a state of work-life balance in journalism. So very timely to talk about this topic. But I think it's no secret that journalism is a stressful job. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most stressful, most journalists rated themselves at a 7 in terms of like the stress in the job. And and the reasons for that are fairly well known and were kind of borne out in the State of Journalism report separately, where I think the majority of journalists express concerns about just, lack of funding, viable business models really not, kind of hitting the mainstream just yet. Obviously, there's been successes in some areas for some folks that don't work for others. But also, the decrease in trust in journalism, not just in the United States, but all over the world. It is definitely a huge factor, as well as just the constantly changing landscape that we find ourselves in, new technologies. We asked a question this year about AI, and a lot of journalists are have plans to explore and use AI, largely generative, but a lot of folks are concerned about just the technology in general and its ability to do good in this world. So there's a lot of different things. So really, the world is changing quickly, but also specifically the media landscape is changing so quickly. So I think it's this kind of what it all boils down to, I think, is kind of just the sands underneath our feet never be feeling solid. And I think that lack of stability in many ways can just lead to stress because you just don't know what's going to come at you next. So that's kind of what we see in our surveys and just in our day-to-day dealing with journalists.
I think it's a really good place to just like set the stage for what we're seeing today. I think everyone on this call has felt that at one point in their lives, at one point in their journalism career. Samantha, like you have experience in the Brazilian media industry. What are you seeing happening there?
Mhm. Oh, I think it's mandatory to say something about sustainability and business model. That's kind of constant crisis about how to finance it. I think Global South and Brazil included has a specific perspective because most part of our funds and financial fundraising for non-for-profit organizations come from finances from north of the global north. So here we depend on international philanthropy. That's a really tricky situation. And of course, the perspective for that those organizations who works with based on advertisement, it's challenging again because we don't have a good perspective about what EI can impact the advertisement in all this part of the business model that sustain media organizations. So I think that's a point mandatory to say, but I think I agree with Andrew some points about how stressful journalism can be, and I can say that one important thing I have seen here in Brazil is how burnout leaderships can sometimes just widespread stable emotional situation for all the staff and compromise the sustainability, at least in organizations with kind of traditional business model and this kind of thing. So it's important uh, uh, set aside the time to think about how leaderships in bad emotional conditions sometimes can compromise all the business model, all the sustainability of organization.
Exactly. So we're gonna spend a little bit of time today talking to Samantha and Andrew about some possible solutions, some things that we can all do to improve whether on a leadership level or just for freelancers or writers, our own sustainability, our own stability. We are going to go through a presentation from Samantha next, then pop it off to Andrew. But remember, please put some questions in the Q&A. We're here to be able to answer your questions. We won't be able to get to all of them probably, but especially around the half-hour mark today, if you can put whatever questions you have in, we're going to try to answer as many as we can. So Samantha, if you would like to begin your own presentation on specifically leadership sustainability and how we can work with that. Perfect.
Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone to be here. It's a pleasure for me can do this presentation. I want to say firstly that I'm come from Brazil, as David said. So Portuguese is my first language, and I appreciate your patience with my mistakes, my accent, trying to speak in English. And getting to start your topic, I'd like to say that the idea to explore this theme came from an experience I had some years ago when I was newsroom coordinator, and the news organization I was working for by that time faced not just leave of an important sponsor, but also a news leadership, a director transition. So the two things together. But these tips I will present for you are not based only in my personal experience. I also interviewed some newsroom leaderships and journalists this year. Initially, just as a way to deal with this difficult time I had in my career. And now it's become a kind of gateway information to share with the ecosystem. So starting, let me see how I can. Oh, yes. New slide for you? Okay, great. So, uncertainty is not about just layoffs. Layoffs is common in our industry. Uncertainty is common. It's very important to be prepared to adopt the less dangerous behavior during these unstable times. And when I say unstable times, I'm not just talking about layoffs, as I said, but I mean, it's about moments when you have a lack of strategy, a lack of decision, all this kind of thing is centered. And sometimes just because leaderships and managers need more time to make a decision. And when you are not the person who get a say on the table, it's difficult to wait. So that's the focus of this presentation, talk about how navigating these difficult transitions and uncertain times. So I don't know if there are other people from South America or Brazil here, just a parenthesis, but this situation about lack of leadership and decision is very common here because our culture has an important thing about being spontaneous. So it's difficult for here in Brazil's leadership value strategy. So for us, it's a situation of reporters and editors sometimes just living with no strategy and no decisions. That can be really, really difficult. Just a parenthesis about our cultural particularities here in Brazil and maybe in South America. So, creating open dialogue during transitions. So what can be the best strategy to deal with these transitions scenarios? The first thing it's important to bear in mind is not underestimate the impact of these situations in your team. Especially talking about layoffs, people who are still in the newsroom who still are in the organization, the survivors, don't just underestimate the negative impact in this staff. So, what you could best strategy to do with this? Don't try to move forward without talking about it. Sometimes as a editor, as a manager, you just say, okay, keep it focused on the projects and the deliveries, but it's important to create a space for the team to discuss, to share experience and the strategy. Just to provide an example, when I had to accompany my team doing through a spin-off or leaving a big company to become independent, an independent newsroom, I took advantage of it to talk about which protocols and tools will really make sense to us in our new independent newsroom and which we have adopted only by the influence of other newsrooms in the company. It helped me to raise awareness about everyone's expectation of the newsroom news situation of independence. So you can create a space, update your dashboard, review the strategy, but it's important to create a space for people explore the other people experience, share this point of view. So I think this is the first important thing in this kind of transition. And of course, small experiments can be really, really, really important in these times of uncertainty and transition because so they motivation your team because you can gather new information, increase cooperation, and interact better with other departments, other areas in the newsroom without big propositions and put more pressure on the table. So it means don't take big risks and think about improvement based and in your audience needs. If you are talking about if you are a reporter or an editor, what kind of service article, for example, your audience need this week? That's a big question to put on the table during your brainstorm in transition periods in difficult times. What kind of service and information our audience needs this week instead of planning big investigations on big things? So think your audience and think in small wins. And if newsroom face difficult moment, yes, that's something important. And more one. And that's a very important and also difficult one because empowered teams during transitions, it's something not just important for transitions, but it's the daily work for managers. And it's a daily work to achieve a kind of balance between work and professional life because no one when are in a management position wants your staff calling for you during your vacations. So think about this tip for a more resilient long-term strategy, promote autonomy through communication. When people know Yes, so start keeping a good and transparent communication about your project's roadmap, goals, metrics, and what kind of solution you're providing with this article, with this report, with this product for your audience and for your coworkers. That's important. And for you provide solutions for your coworkers too. So keep this in mind and communicate clearly about this for your staff because when people know what the projects are and what goal and what metrics they are pursuing, it's easier. It's easier to deal with transitions and change. Imagine the situation if your team have to present yourself or your projects for a new leadership, a new manager. It's important to have your roadmap in your lips, and it's keep your more security, provide you a vision about your role in the newsroom. So that's important to this autonomy, that's clear communication, update data is important to keep this autonomy. And it's not a question of keep the route. It's a question of to understand how the plan has been changing and to adapt. Because if you have no idea uh, the how big or how in what kind of routes the strategy is going and how different the things are going, how to adapt. That's the question. So keep a roadmap and clear communication about the strategy is not to keep the strategy in every situation. Is to become to have a point of a fixed point to understand the shift around you. I think that's an important thing. And here, just to summarize these things, uh, acknowledge and discuss changes, open dialogue. It's important to manage yourself as a manager, yourself as a reporter, because no one will fix the newsroom problems by itself just being stressful and lose your balance among personal and professional life. Embrace small experiments. So remember, if your previous plan was launch a new newsletter, just keep in mind you can improve other newsletters and delivery small wins for your team and for your newsroom. You keep the motivation, you keep people safe with this kind of small experiment and foster autonomy with communication because it's a good strategy to prepare for transitions. Uh, and I think it's that I want to share with you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Samantha. That was incredible. I think a lot of people will be interested if you could eventually share a version of the slides with us. And also, there will be a recording of this online within a week, everyone, just so that you can see it there. I was really impressed by the idea of embrace small experiments. I think that's something we in a newsroom, we always try to think big and starting small, thinking about, I like this quote, what does your audience need this week instead of the next year or anything like that, I think is huge. Um, so something we should probably bring into iShanet ourselves. Andrew, we're gonna flip to you. What you work a little bit more on on Muck Rack, so you're not like working inside the newsroom like Samantha is, but
Mhm.
you have experience in this as well. What kind of talking more about useful tools that journalists can use, like maybe do some of these processes. What easy tools do you know that journalists can use to improve their sustainability or take some of the financial stress off of the financial aspect of journalism?
For sure. I think one of our primary audiences at Muck Rack is on the journalist side is definitely for freelancers because all of our tools are completely free, always will be. I think that's the first benefit, right? We all know that journalists aren't always the best compensated people on the planet, unfortunately, but it's what it is. But especially as a freelancer, I mean, it's already stressful enough having to manage a freelance career, pitch your stories, try to get lands, get your check sent. It's stressful enough, right? So I think our idea is like anything we can do to alleviate any bit of stress. I think take those small wins, right? And I think it kind of echoes to what Samantha said is, I think inherently journalists are a type A, high achieving kind of people. They have to be to succeed in this business. So I think these kind of people are always hard on themselves and they don't feel like they're doing these huge things, but like one step at a time, right? Especially if you're just starting a freelance career and you're trying to figure it all out, just one step at a time. So from Muckrak's perspective, our primary tool set is aimed at allowing journalists to have a free um, portfolio of all of their work. And many of you may have noticed that Muckrack automatically scrapes and assigns articles that have your byline to your profile. So it's kind of an automatically updating, especially if you're mostly publishing online. But we also have the ability for folks to update their own pieces, whether it's their favorites, PDFs, maybe it was paywalled, maybe it was only in a magazine, so you want to put that up. Just anything you want to do to show that, and it's obviously to share with friends and family and readers, but also prospective employers and editors that want to see your clips, right? And by being free and also coming really high up in SEO, You don't have to pay for domain fees, right? To have your own website, just have your Muckrack profile and your signature, have it ready to send. Um, Always make sure that it has, your social networks, your contact information, what you do or don't cover, your pronouns, biographies, where you've worked, and kind of what you like to work on, So, and then by it, if you're mostly digital, if it's automatically updating, then you don't have to think about it. Unlike, if you suddenly find yourself having to pitch articles again and you have your own website or you're putting it on LinkedIn, you have to panic, upload all of your clips, or where are my clips? Where do I save this stuff? So it's really easy in that way. But then on top of the portfolio stuff and the profile things, we have a lot of really great tools that help freelancers kind of quantify their work. So we have a tool called Who Shared My Link, where you could pop a link in there and it shows you, who's talking about it online, how many shares it got. It gives you high level kind of domain metrics from our partners at SimilarWeb and ComScore. And these are all things that, newsrooms and institutions will have access to by having, bigger budgets than a freelancer, but we give this to you for free, right? Um, we recently launched a jobs board and it aggregates jobs from all over the web. So instead of going to 10 sites to look for jobs, you just have to come to ours and it goes to all the same sites you're looking everywhere. So that hopefully saves you time. We're looking to expand that. It's mostly US and maybe Canada. We're looking to expand that to the UK now. So still largely English speaking in the global north, to use those words. But always looking to figure out where people want to see jobs and happy to put those in. We also partnered with our friend Peter Schenkman, who started a source of sources. You may recognize that name from starting HARO, or Help a Reporter Out, which is no longer in existence. But he started a similar service called Source of Sources that that is a newsletter that journalists can post what they're looking for, and it goes to a PR list of people if you're looking for sources. Um, or interview subjects, just post it in there. It's free, and it has a space for your Muckrack profile, so drop that in there too. And it just lets people reach out to you, and hopefully it saves you time in trying to find sources. It kind of delegates that out, especially now that some of some of that competition is no longer existing, and the availability of folks on other social platforms is in question. Just an easy email. So those are some of the things, and also happy to send some resources out later to kind of point to these tools and some of the other things, as well as my contact info for anyone here to reach out to me directly if you have any concerns or questions about your Muckrack profile or how it works. Happy to work with you directly.
I mean, I think following up on that, what is one thing that, I have a Muckrack profile. I think most people on this call probably do. What is one thing that you would say to get the most out of your Muckrack profile, that for our audience that could help them specifically with their own sustainability, with their own sustainability as a freelancer?
I think it's just like any other tool, right? So you get as much out of it as you put in. So I'd say, just fill in as much of it as you can, right? And it's the same thing as, like, even if you're on LinkedIn, like, there's nothing kind of sketchier to a digital native than seeing a LinkedIn profile that has, nothing on it. It's like, is this a real person? I don't know. So by appearing more engaged on these tools, including Muckrack, I think it just immediately sends a signal that you're savvy, you're here, you're kind of a active participant in your career, and you're looking to be out there. And I do think that people looking will, if comparing two profiles, face to face, if one's got like a more modern looking picture, and some more information about their biography and what they cover, as opposed to another, then that one's going to just win out in the face, I think.
No, this is a question for both of you right now. And I know that we're trying to get some questions in, so please start putting your questions in right now, and we're going to transition to a few of these, because really what we're here to do is to answer your questions and see how Andrew and Samantha can help out with the questions you have. But one of the questions we have right now is, it used to be that the major place that people would post their work, get recognized, was Twitter/X. That is changing now. And I think a lot of journalists have questions about stuff like this, of when it doesn't have to be Blue Sky, Threads, and it doesn't have to be like a Twitter like platform. But when is it time for us to consider jumping on new technologies, jumping on new innovations, jumping on new, whether it's this, AI, ChatGPT, there's been so much technological advancements. Just, I'm thinking just in the 3 years I've been at IJNet, we've had dealt with so much technological advancement. In your own experience, when is it time for journalists to really jump on that? And when is it time for them to kind of like take a step back and say, kind of what we were talking about earlier, Samantha, is it, is that too big of a leap? Is it not like a small experiment? Is it not focusing on the small things? Or when is it time to just say, you know what, let's take this chance?
I've been talking a long time, Samantha, if you wanted to go first.
Okay, I can go first. And yes, I'm keen of small experiment and to draft hypotheses for all the time. And I think one thing important about how to jump in new technologies is to keep a kind of hypothesis portfolio update. What things you just think about, ideas you have in the supermarket, in house, you're working. So just keep the idea in a block note in some kind of in a note. And when you have some kind of hypothesis and a new technologies, just try to connect them. Okay, these new technologies are emerging. What kind of services this technology provide? What kind of interest they are bringing for the consumer, and think about your hypothesis. There is something, is there some, there something I can connect with these new technologies? So I'm more interested in experimenting hypotheses in new technologies instead of just jumping in because they can be a kind of tricky and overwhelmed just to try to understand what I can learn of these technologies without an hypothesis. But of course, it's just one approach. My favorite approach. There is other ones, but I think we are a really creative industry. You have our hypotheses, our ideas, our experiments. And sometimes you just have to set aside time to connect, organize our ideas, hypotheses, and connect with emerging trends. So I think that is the the challenge for understand when jump in new technologies.
Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
I think my immediately just by being where I'm at, not actually being a trained or working journalist myself, it's like try it all, right? But it's easier said than done. It's already the job is already so stressful it is, and now you're like, now I got to do this, like to add on to everything else, right? But it's the state of the game, right? And I think at the very least, I myself was always kind of a light Twitter user, so my feet are kind of like in the very shallow end of Blue Sky and Threads, as microblogging goes. But I think there's always going to be early adopters, right? So I think even if you don't feel like these tools are really going to be used by you in your day to day, it's good to know those who are doing it well and follow what they're doing and get their ideas. I think each of these is going to have people who are like really kind of figuring it out. Like I know already on the microblogging platforms, for example, I'm already following some journalists who are just very active on there and posting like YouTube content and answering things. And I do think the uptake on TikTok by journalism has been, in hindsight, much slower than I think a lot of people would have hoped now, especially in the United States post-election. But hopefully, with the amount of change that's happening, I hope that the journalism community finds themselves getting out of this conservative mindset, and I say conservative with a small c, and just, like doing what we've done hasn't necessarily been working. We gotta throw some stuff at the wall and figure out, right. And it all goes back to Samantha's great advice about like, okay, let's get one person in the newsroom who like doesn't hate TikTok and understands it to just like figure it out, like, because I think a lot of journals haven't quite figured out how to engage there. But what we saw is that with the amount of misinformation that's going around, it's, we gotta, I think the immediate kind of old school journalists to say, well, we're not going to get in the mud there, but I think that kind of mindset is kind of out the window now. We got to be in the mud to like, show them what's right, and have people who are smart and have been covering this kind of any kind of topics, not just politics, for years to help explain this to folks who are not reading newspapers or not even reading the websites anymore. I mean, I'm a middle-aged millennial, and I remember when we were killing the newspaper, but now like the next generation's already killing the website, the news website, right? So they're not even reading that. So I think um, don't get too stressed out by having to be on all of them. Just you have to know about them. You have to know what purposes they serve. And again, keep an eye on folks who are doing good work there. I think even the Substackers, folks who are making, who have tons of subscriptions and are making good money on Substack, what is it about them that is interesting? Like what can we learn from them? And the same thing applies to any platform, I think.
I, Samantha, Andrew, I think we're all very grateful that you're on because these are a really great piece of advice. I'm taking notes myself for iGenet right now on some of the things. I'm going to start with some questions, and everyone, please put your questions in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Actually, this one's first to you, Andrew. And I really like this one. What are the new job trends you personally see that freelance content, copy editors can explore outside of the media industry, just to keep themselves sustainable?
Yeah, I think one thing the trend that I've noticed for a long time and that it's continued, it hasn't slowed down at all, is writing marketing content, which, doesn't sound the most exciting, but if you can find a brand that, that you personally identify with, or maybe is achieving a mission that you value, I think in the as the media landscape expands, and folks are finding ways to get their message out in different ways outside of out of earned journalism, is trying to make really engaging blogs and websites. I was just on a I think it was I think it's a German based um, retailer online. I think they sell like makeup and perfume, beauty products, and but they have a magazine on their website, right next to all their content that just shows, not just their stuff, but like, beauty trends and things like that. So it's kind of like journalism, but you're working in house. So, but it's obviously marketing. So content copy for companies I've seen a lot of, and I still think this isn't as much of a thing as maybe it used to be, but I still think, finding your way into comms, PR, and marketing is still a thing. I think I've been seeing a lot more, especially at the local level. I've been seeing a lot of kind of old hat journalists moving into doing PR for local governments, moving into your local capital or the mayor's office, or, even, like local nonprofits, seeing a lot of that. But I think there's a lot of content that needs to be made, and we all know that even though ChatGPT is and generative AI is like the sexy phrase of the time, we all know that the content is soulless, and it's not there. It hasn't replaced people, and there are doubts that it could ever replace people. So using your storytelling abilities to bring that to brands and organizations, even nonprofits, they're always looking for ways to tell their stories. So I think that's something that is continuing to happen that I see.
I have another question that I think both Andrew and Samantha can address because it kind of hits both your wheelhouses. This is from Andres Garabello. Thank you, Andres. What would you recommend? So this is kind of a transition question too. For people who were like an editor for more than like 10 years, or moving from being an editor to more of a freelance or independent transition, what would you recommend for them?
I don't know if you want to go first, Samantha. Again, I've been talking a while.
Okay, I think I can answer this question. Just think about sometimes we as journalists think about the pieces and the articles you publish, but but we don't think so much in the technique and the solutions we provide and we design to when someone is struggling with difficult issues doing the daily work as a reporter. So as an editor with more than 10 years of experience, I think it's important to think about what kind of difficult works you had as an editor and how you design the solutions for these specific issues. This kind of thought can be your portfolio too, more than the publishes, also so good as the articles you publish, you work together with someone. I think this is something important because part of our technique, our process workflows as journalists and newsroom is still going on. Something change, some kind of works has facing change for these times, but some part of the technique is still going on. So think about how to prepare your profile based on your experience to find solutions for more for a better storytelling, for a better data, for I don't know, providing a more creative space for reporters working together. All this kind of technique are part of the portfolio of an editor. So I think it's a good strategy when you don't have a update or a very award portfolio public in your portfolio.
Andrew, what if someone doesn't have a profile online? How do they, well, one, how do they get started on Muck? And two, like, how would they start, putting all that together?
Yeah, at first I have to say I completely agree with Samantha. Was about what I was going to say is that, we have to definitely think outside the box a little bit as opposed to someone who has a recent kind of active portfolio of bylined articles. So I think, yeah, it's definitely not just it's not just things that you worked on. Maybe it was podcasts, maybe it was YouTube videos that you posted, maybe it was some social posts. Like gather some of those things to say either this was my idea or I was heavily involved in this, and here's how we kind of thought through it. And then second to that, it's also kind of I guess similar to a cover letter. It's kind of what is my mantra as an editor? Like what do I think of first? What do I see as the macro issues and the micro issues within a newsroom and within the journalism community writ large? And how do I think about those? So it's how you it's finding those ways to express all of this kind of high-minded stuff that you think of as an editor and bringing it down into a physical form that someone can ingest and ponder on. So within Muckrack, I'd say Muckrack is definitely built more for the active writing portfolio, but we have a lot of fields to fill in that I think could be great things like about, again, what you've covered, even when you were writing, say, even if it was 10 years ago, and what you'd been editing, like things that you've learned over the years and kind of where your expertise lies. And, I think there are places for that. And though many profiles on Muckrack have been automatically created from content that we discover, there's also plenty of folks that you just sign up fresh and start a new profile, which is just as easy as signing up for anything else online. Just go to muckrack.com and register and we're there to help. So there's a chat function and we have support emails and things and my team's in there actively responding every day and we can help come up with strategies. It's what we're there to help with.
So there's a couple of Muckrack specific questions in the Q&A. I think you addressed most of them. So we might circle back to them.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask kind of like a more forward-thinking question to everyone. And everyone who's watching now, feel free to add a few more questions. We might have a little bit of time after this. We're in a state with the media industry right now where dire is sometimes the word that's being used. Especially, funding's tough, freelancing's tough, layoffs are happening. It's been a really tough couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
In your own experiences, Samantha in Brazil, Andrew just kind of like on the Muckrack side, what are kind of like the rays of light you're seeing? What are some of the positive things that might be coming that journalists should start thinking about now? What's changing in a positive direction rather than just the doom and gloom that we all see all the time right now? Samantha, I'll let you take that one to start.
So I think I can start sharing a small example of something is happening now in Brazil about audience shift of behavior in our audience because Brazil has faced a lot of climatic emergence this year. all over the country. But historically, it has been very difficult for reporters and editors to engage people in environmental and climate change articles and projects and reports. But since the beginning of this year, with the climate emergence in south of Brazil and north of Brazil, we can already see a change of behavior in people more looking for information and for climate change. So one thing I'm sharing this situation about Brazil because I think it's important uh, to set aside time to understand audience, of course, but in more detailed, specific, particular things, not in general. Okay, you have a lot of trends in data, but what kind of situation the audience are facing in living your daily experience that can emerge from them for this situation, new behavior. So it's just highlight something, refresh our motivation here in Brazil for this difficult situation. But sometimes this refresh and haze of lights come from a big context, not just about us, not just about our agents. So it's just keep in mind to look around and what kind of signs the world and the daily world can send for us. I think it is one way to address the question you put for us.
Andrew, anything to add to that?
Not much. I think, if there is a resilient group of people, I would say journalists are that, right? So despite all the hits, I do think that journalists all over the world are tied by the kind of the same binding credo of, the old like exposing truth to power but even just even getting down to educating people at any level, right? So I think that's still something that really motivates this group of people, and that's needed now maybe more than ever. So that'll continue, I think, to motivate even folks to come into this industry fresh. But I do just hope that there's just kind of increased flexibility on what a journalist looks like, how a journalist gets into this business, how a journalist learns to do this job, in ways that can make it more sustainable going forward. Specifically thinking about the cost of education in the United States, but also all over the world. Um, but yeah, I think it's a smart, dedicated group of people who have gone through a lot. But I think, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I hope that that kind of continues to go forward. I've continued seeing that in recent years, even through that all. And obviously, there's still great journalism being done all over the place. So let's focus on that rather just as much as all the hard tacks that are coming journalists' way.
There's one question here, which I think could be a really good question to land on. I think it's something that we've danced around a little bit in the talk today, but people I think are interested in it, which is from Chanel September. In what ways can technology enhance journalistic practices while preserving the core ethical principles of reporting? So I think a good question here is how can we adopt new technologies, new things that are coming our way, and still keep that core ethics of reporting? Samantha, do you want to take this one again?
Yes, I can take this one. I think the first thing I want to say is that it has been very common for us in our generation uh, follow the step of adventure of technology. Some technology emerge and bring with them a lot of experiments, and everything seems so new and difficult that this kind of question and concerns emerging too. So I think the first thing I want to say is sometimes we just have to take a time to wait for the adventure time go ahead and the things set down a little more to understand how to connect our ethical and principles as journalists with the technology. Sometimes it's just a matter of time and of course experiment the new technologies, but just wait for a more settled situation with the technology. And I think the second part of my answer is uh, I think it's important to understand, of course, all the time what journalism is, our missions, what kind of service we provide for all. Not just about I mean, not just talk about audience, but talk about our societies, our communities, and I think you can design our ethical principles keeping this in mind. You understand these technologies because technology is a tool and you can guide these tools based on our principles and our role in the society. I think that's something to keep in mind.
Andrew, do you want to have the last word on this?
You know, I think it kind of goes back to when we were talking about like individual kind of technology platforms before, right? So it's asking yourself, again, how do these fit into the workflow? Because they may not, and that's okay, right? Like I think the pressure to be on a platform or use a technology because it's there is kind of really overriding because, I think no one wants to look like you're, a Luddite or you don't know what you're talking about, but sometimes you're like, this just doesn't make sense for us, right? I mean, I even remember back in the day when a long time ago, they first started allowing like organizations on Facebook, for example, and like or being on LinkedIn, and it's kind of like, well, does the New York Times need to be on? Let's think even smaller, like even like a trade publication. Like, do they need to be on Facebook? Probably not, right? But like everyone back then was like, well, we have to be on Facebook because everyone's on Facebook. But it's like if your audience isn't there and it's more work than it's worth, then don't be on it. And I think that applies to the ethical principles. And I think that's probably what prevents a lot of organizations, journalists from like taking these on is because they're like, oh, this doesn't seem right. Specifically like the AI stuff, right? Because, the the likelihood of misinformation is so high that that's immediately like a no, right? But if we're trying to make our lives more efficient, you take that into account and you know that, and but I know I've seen some organizations being like this was partly or fully generated by AI, and if you're being transparent, then and it's been checked, I guess, for obviously, then you're being honest, you're being straightforward, and you're still informing. So you're still abiding by your principles. It just seems maybe a little different than it's applying in a different way than it was before. So I think before you take on any new technology, I think people should ask themselves or institutionally themselves, uh, how do we fit this in, right? Like we have to keep updating our guidebooks for these things. And we even separately at Muckrack, every time there's kind of a new platform or new something we have to do, we go back and we're like, okay, how do we fit this in? And I know that like we've updated our, like for example, we verify journalists on Muckrack. We've updated our criteria multiple times, and now we say, we don't verify journalists who the majority of their work is, AI generated, or there's transparency and things like that. So we've been making those decisions on our end as well, and always being like at the core, are we still being fair to full-time working journalists in whatever kind of format they're working in to own this kind of verified check? So I think it's really just asking those questions and being okay with moving forward, whatever that decision ends up being.
Well, we're kind of coming up on time right now. I think the last question for everyone is, Andrew, I know there's a couple of like Muckrock specific questions in there that people might want to send to you.
I responded to those directly and just gave
Okay,
them my email address. But in the follow-up that goes, I'm happy again to include my contact information so you all can reach out to me specifically with my crack questions.
perfect. And you are Andrew underscore Muckrack on X, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Are we on Blue Sky yet?
Yes, in a personal way, I have
Not
not made the
professionally.
I have not made the professional move, but may do that soon. There's a lot of interest, but I will add finally that Muckrack has the ability to list Blue Sky profiles and Threads profiles. So
Perfect.
feel free to get your Blue Skies and Threads on there, and we'll be able to connect.
And Samantha, how can people follow you and be more involved with you in Azure?
So I think for me, professional LinkedIn is my favorite tool for network and connect with people. I just love LinkedIn. And with Azure, you can follow us in Blue Sky, to Facebook, and especially Instagram, because I don't know if you know, but Instagram is very, very, very popular in Brazil. In Instagram, so just follow us, azure.org and .br from Brazil, the two uh, letters from Brazil. And I think that is, and I can share my emails too, but just follow me on LinkedIn. I'm really active there.
Well, thank you both for joining us today on the IGNet Forum. Samantha, big shout out for doing an entire webinar in a second language. I could never do that. So we were
Really.
very impressed by your work today. And I'm going to let everyone go from here. So thank you both once again. And you guys both and our entire audience, I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good time. Bye.